The world we live in is nothing but a reflection of our minds. You get to choose what happens to you or what you think. Your feelings and thoughts can change the reality of everything in your life, including you. We spend most of our lives in our heads processing the world and other people through our own beliefs and biases. Most of us understand very little about how our brains work and what they are capable of. Are you familiar with the saying, mind over matter? If so, is mind over matter a real thing? What do you think? Is our brain capable of pushing us to do something that we didn't know we could do? Can we run a marathon and learn a whole new language? Scientists have believed the material universe was indeed the only reality. It was said to be constructed of random pieces of matter with no order. Here it applies the famous saying, what you see is what you get. However, this belief was upended by the physicists who proved that everything in the universe exists because of energy. Day by day, we are witnessing that everything is energy at the most fundamental levels. Which are the smallest unit of matter? Atoms. Every matter of solid, liquid, or gas is made from atoms. Not just that, but everything around you, everything that you see from your own body to the planets, to the stars and sky, is made of atoms. Crazy, right? The building block of the universe is these atoms. But, atoms are not made from solid matter. There are 3 different subatomic particles inside of them. These 3 subatomic particles are called neutrons, protons, and electrons. In the center of the atom, the protons and neutrons are packed together. On the other hand, the electrons move around the outside. The solid atoms that form objects and substances are made up of 99.99% empty space. This is pure energy. Since everything is made of atoms, this also shows us that everything is made up of energy. In other words, the same energy that makes you and me is the same energy that composes the water, the trees, the rocks, and everything else around us. We, humans, are energy-creating beings by default. We believe that energy stems from consciousness. This consciousness connects with the material world. Do you know that we can influence reality by changing our thoughts and channeling the energy through our minds? Do you believe this? If you don't, get ready because we will present some of the most extraordinary experiments proving that our thoughts can influence, or even change our reality. Are you ready? Let's begin with the intention experiment. What is an intention experiment and what is its goal? Lynn McTaggart is an American publisher, author, and journalist. Lynn McTaggart conducts investigations all around the world. But one of their experiments is worth mentioning. Lynn McTaggart experimented with 10,000 people that had to do with a single intention, a leaf. All she had was a leaf. What was the goal of a leaf? The goal was to make the leaf glow. The group of people there chose which leaf to use by flipping a coin. How could we see if the leaf would glow? In order to see the leaf glow, there was a high-powered sensitive camera that would monitor the photos of the leaf. The one who led this experiment was Dr. Gary Schwartz from the University of Arizona. The results of this experiment were just as they suspected. The leaf that had received the intention had glowed much brighter than the leaf that didn't. This experiment had been repeated multiple times, and every time it was successful. However, this wasn't the only experiment that took place. A very similar experiment was performed, but a plant was used this time instead of a leaf. The experiment was done by a large group of Australians who sent energy to the plant's seeds. The energy caused the seeds to germinate faster, and the plants grew faster and bigger. This experiment, too, was performed many times with the same results. Since we are talking about plants, we can't ignore the famous Chulan sundae. Who was Chulan Sun? Chulan Tzu was a Chinese woman, but not just a woman, an extraordinary woman. She could grow seeds in her arms. How was this possible? She grew out seeds using her own mind. Is our mind this powerful? Can we grow seeds out of our hands if we put our minds to it? Chulan Sun practices Wai Chi. What is Wai Chi? It is a type of Qigong that teaches the practitioner to bring the Qi energy of Chinese medicine all under the control of the mind. The Chinese woman uses the power of her mind to grow shoots and roots several centimeters long within 10 minutes. This extraordinary deed has been demonstrated on more than 180 different occasions. It has been shown at various universities, science, and research institutions in China and Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, etc. Many witnesses had noted that the woman goes into a deep trance-like state. She then advances the time required to sprout dry seeds from their normal 3 to 4 days to only 20 minutes. This incredible story was published in the American Journal of Chinese Medicine. However, the stories don't stop here. Let's start with Masaru Emoto's water experiment. Dr. Masaru is a Japanese scientist and was the first one to show us how our intention and thoughts impact physical matter. What did his experiment show us? Dr. Masaru was able to show us scientific evidence that the molecule structure in water can be transformed. How can the molecule structure get changed? Weirdly, but interestingly, the molecule structure can get transformed by the words, thoughts, and sounds of a human. Dr. Masaru had also written a book about this called The Messages in Water. The author shows us what happens when the water gets exposed to different intentions in this book. Other intentions are given, such as love, compassion, and benevolence. However, the results were unpleasant formations when the water got exposed to fearful or discordant intentions. The differences and the changes were captured from magnetic resonance analysis technology and high-speed photographs. Dr. Masaru experimented with polluted water. He showed that even the polluted water could be turned into something beautiful. Why did it change? Why made the change possible? It became something beautiful when the polluted water got exposed to meditation, prayer, and positive intentions. Our body is 70% water. So, imagine how powerful our thoughts can be. Let's move on to another experiment worth mentioning, called Dr. Masaru Emoto's rice experiment. Since the experiment with water was a success, Dr. Masaru wanted to try something different yet similar. This time he used rice. He poured rice into 3 beakers. Then, he poured water into each beaker to pass the rice level. Dr. Masaru spent 30 days talking to the rice on the beakers. However, the words were not the same as one. In one of the beakers, he thanked it every day. One of the beakers of rice, he called it an idiot. Then the other beaker of rice, he ignored it completely. What happened to each of these beakers with rice? What do you think? The results were, once again, breathtaking. The rice in the beaker that the doctor thanked every day started to ferment and gave off a strong pleasant aroma. The rice in the second beaker that he called an idiot turned black. Then, the rice in the third beaker that the doctor ignored began to rot. We learned a lot from this experiment. We learned that the physical results are affected by the intentions and the positive words. It all depends on how you talk to someone and treat them. When you treat something well, it will thrive. But, when you mistreat something or ignore it, it will fail. Another successful experiment that tells us that thoughts can change reality is Dr. William Tiller's experiment. Dr. William is a professor emeritus at Stanford University for the engineering department and material science. His all-time passion has always been studying the mind over matter phenomena. However, he had made this passion successful. He had made it possible through many experiments to show us that our mind directly impacts physical matter. In one of his many experiments, he took a group of people who had placed their awareness on an electrical circuit. The electrical circuit had a crystal on it. Then, they implanted an intent on it, and the pH of water went up and down based on it. The circuits were wrapped in aluminum foil. They were shipped to a lab and got placed next to a water sample. The participants in the study were isolated, and nobody was inside that room. There was absolute silence and no distractions. The environmental factors were monitored carefully. Then, finally, the results took place. The experiments showed the water samples. The water samples responded to the mind power. To make this even more believable to you, you should know that the chances of this happening on its own is 1,000,000 to 1. This experiment wasn't the only one that Dr. William did. He did another one, where he could increase the growth of fruit flies by 15%. He showed us that the power of the mind is never limited. Another experiment is the CIA's Remove Viewing program. The CIA declassified and approved releasing documents revealing its sponsorship of the program at Stanford Research Institute in California. The goal was to determine whether the remote viewing and astral projection could be utilized to gather intelligence, which began disclosure to the public in a 2-decade, plus the intelligence community's involvement, which was called parapsychological phenomena. However, remote viewing can be defined in a lot of ways. For example, someone can describe a remote geographical location up to several 100,000 kilometers away, even when it is far from their physical location. Ingo Swann was a man who participated in this experiment and said that he had experienced an out-of-body, in which he traveled and observed both Mercury and Jupiter. Ingo Swann describes what Mercury and Jupiter looked like. He said that he had discovered that the planet has a fragile atmosphere. The planet has a magnetic field and solar winds. He said the sky was painted with shifting lights akin to the aurora borealis. The Mercury had a primitive form of plant life like a sort of lichen that covered the surface rocks, said Ingo Swann. However, when Ingo Swann shared his experience with the world, everyone laughed at him, including the scientists. They didn't believe a word he said and weren't taken seriously. However, everything changed when Mariner 10 did a flyby of the planet for the first time. What discoveries were made? Surprisingly, it was found out that the Mercury was like a swan, exactly as Ingo Swann had described. A long time ago, it was believed that the Mercury had no magnetic, no poles, or any atmosphere at all. However, Ingo Swann had apparently seen this first. What did Ingo Swann say about Jupiter? He had described it as a frigid place with a toxic, poisonous atmosphere. He claimed that Jupiter possessed many colors, like a giant fireworks display. He said that Jupiter had raging tornadoes on the surface, and some winds were more substantial than any on Earth. Jupiter had solid magnetic forces. There was a 30,000-foot-high mountain range. Was Jupiter exactly as Ingo Swann said? What did they find out when they did a flyby? After some months of Ingo Swann sharing his own experience, Pioneer 10 occurred. Pioneer 10 did a flyby past Jupiter for the first time. What did they see there? Surprisingly, the predictions were accurate. Everything that Ingo Swann had said matched with the description of Jupiter. Then, everyone began to believe his words and was astonished by Swann's remote viewing insights into astral travel. The American astronaut Edgar Mitchell had shared what he thought about the predictions of Ingo Swann. He said that the scientists did not know the details that Ingo Swann had given before the Mariner 10 and the Pioneer 10 satellites flew by and got the information. The astronaut believes the words of Ingo Swann and says that he couldn't have guessed something this extraordinary. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell said that the impressions of Ingo Swann of Mercury and Jupiter shouldn't be dismissed. However, the experiments of Ingo Swann don't make implicit that consciousness affects physical matter. These experiments prove that our brain or body does not limit our consciousness. It is something much more powerful to it. Our bodies are not our physical vehicles. Our true nature is not physical but spiritual. Let's move on to another experiment, shall we? The following experiment is called the double-slit experiment. You might know the famous statement of modern physics, the observer affects the observed. But, it makes us wonder, how many of us know the behind of it? Its meaning? This refers to how a person can affect what she has seen. This is the result of the double-slit experiment. What is the double-slit experiment? Many have found this experiment weird and strange, yet interesting. The double-slit experiment involves looking at the photons and the electrons fired through a single slit. However, this had caused a tiny dot to appear in the film. The slight drop looked like a bullet going through a doorway and leaving a bullet hole on the wall across the room. You might say that you don't know why we called this experiment strange. The strange part about this is that when there were two slits for the electron and the photons to go through it, it didn't create a dot but a wave. This means that the photon paths are knowable. The photons and the electrons respond in waves when the path is unknown. It makes us wonder if the photon is going through one of the two slits or breaks apart and goes through both slits. This is a question that no one has been able to answer. Scientists have tried to put the puzzle together and have an answer. But the wave pattern disappears as soon as they install a detector to track it. The detector does not physically influence the experiment. The same firing of electrons and photons through the two slits was made. However, the response of the detector was different. What is the explanation behind all of this? We can say that the only cause of this is the so-called observer effect. The process changes its outcome, even though it does not directly affect the process. This has been used in popular culture. What does it show? It shows that just by observing something, you can change the result. Many people had criticized this explanation and didn't believe it. However, the experiment has been done so many times. Scientists at the Institute of Noetic Science, named Dean Radin, had published a study. His study re-examined the double-slit experiment. What did he find out new that the others couldn't? Dean Radin had set up the double-slit experiment in a room. The room was shielded from electromagnetic signals and physical vibrations. There were mediators and non-mediators. They had put their minds inside the box and watched the photons go through. It was found that the mediators could change the patterns of the particles from a wave into two dots. However, the non-mediators weren't able to produce. Many times, the experiment was performed to see that this effect was what went on. It was performed 50 times with 50 mediators. This experiment was even performed with mediators online. The wave pattern collapsing showed us that the mind could affect results even from many miles away. They wanted to take the experiment even further. So, Redken hooked up an EEG onto one of the people that participated in the investigation. They tried to track their concentration and see what happened. When the participants were concentrated, it affected the results immediately. However, when they wouldn't focus enough, the wave pattern would appear again. This experiment showed that the suitable temporal lobe activity was high when concentrating and collapsing the wave. I know that you are probably wondering how you can use your mind to alter your reality right now. What must you know? You must train your mind to focus and concentrate enough for your energy to infiltrate the universe. Many people might say they don't want to put something out into the universe. Many might fear that it might turn into something negative. However, all of this is caused by the anxiety that people have. Unfortunately, anxiety is the one that causes the bad energy to go into the universe. This energy would indeed make that lousy situation happen. However, we can change that. We can learn to control our anxiety and be more peaceful with our minds and body. To avoid lousy energy going into the universe is if things are being done with positivity. It would be best if you learned how to put off positive energy, and this way, it can go out there, in the university, and you can alter your reality. You are the one who is in control of your consciousness. You are the one who can believe and have faith that something that you want will happen. Because if there is a deep feeling inside of you and the emotion behind what you want to happen, it will impact you and your surroundings. Those feelings and emotions that you are putting off will be the change in your own life and yourself. These experiments have taught us a lot, haven't they? There is one thing that is more important above all: how we talk to each other. The way that we treat each other. Words affect more than you think, the energy effect. Everything around you and inside you affects you. However, don't forget that you are the master of your own mind. If you think you're able to do something, then you are. Don't let anyone say otherwise.